Let's use dependency grammar trees to analyze another sentence from a real discussion from an online forum. Here's the forum post, and we're going to do Justin's first sentence. You could probably just read this sentence normally, but I'm going to walk you through the process of reading it in a methodical way using steps and tools, and you can apply that whenever you're confused or whenever you're not on the same page as someone else about what a sentence means. It lets you understand things explicitly and consciously instead of just intuitively. And it lets you see how much work your intuition is doing. When you read intuitively, your intuition has to do all the work that conscious analysis takes. It just does all that work subconsciously without you realizing it. Just like when you use a computer, there's tons of computations happening in the background that you don't really see. You see the user interface and you see a few things happening, but the computer does a ton more work in the background that you don't see. So here's the sentence. It's quite long, and I learned my lesson from last time. I'm not typing this whole thing into separate text boxes. To do that, what I was doing was copy a text box so it's on the clipboard, then you do paste, type a word, and hit escape to deselect, then paste again, type word, escape, paste, type word, escape. You have to do that for every word, and it is annoying. So as part of showing my process and the methods by which you can do things, and trying to help people see how to do things, I want to start with actually how to use computers well. So I wrote a quick Ruby script that can write out all the words for me. It actually generates an Apple script, and then the Apple script writes out the words. The main point is you take a sentence and you split it up by wherever there's a space, and then you loop through each word, and you write out the appropriate Apple script into a file. If you don't know how to do this kind of thing, that's fine, but I think people should be aware of what computers can do and how they can save time and effort. And this script is simpler than it looks like. Even if you couldn't write it yourself and you don't want to learn, you might be able to get a programmer friend to do it because it wouldn't take them very long. This part at the bottom for using temporary files, I copied off Stack Overflow. I've done it before, but I didn't remember offhand how to do it, so you just copy it. That's easy. Anything in gray is just a comment. That's like documentation, not code. This part here is the sentence, so I was copy pasting in Justin's sentence, not code that I have to write. So the actual code, here's the Apple script, which I looked up on Stack Overflow. I've used this before, but I didn't remember it offhand, so I looked up how do you type things using Apple script. And so I put that into the Ruby script. And then the main part of my code is right here. We split the sentence on space, and then we loop through. And for every word, we use the word template. I have two templates. There's the script template, the outer part, and then the individual word template. So the script template is used once. It's saying at the beginning we need to activate application keynote, and then we tell application system events, which is the application that can receive keyboard input. And then we have the middle, and then we have end tell at the end. And then for an individual word, we have to do three things. We have to keystroke, meaning type, 3 using control down. That is my hotkey for making a text box, which I figured out is a better way to do it than using copy paste. And then keystroke some unspecified thing, which will be specified as the word, but the template doesn't say what it is. It's like a variable. And then delay by 1/100th of a second. I found with this kind of thing, having short delays tends to work better. It can be unreliable with no delays. So for this to work, I had to set the text box hotkey in system preferences. Well, not very hard. That is a thing you can do with every app. All you have to do is go to keyboard and then shortcuts, and you can set up a hotkey for anything in the menus that doesn't have a hotkey. And you can make the hotkey only work in that specific app. So I had to type in the words text box because that's what it said in the menu, and then now that menu item has a hotkey. So this generates an Apple script because Apple script can send keystrokes. So the Apple script looks like this. So it's very repetitive, but here's the main idea. For example, we're keystroke 3 using control down, which is just the text box hotkey, then keystroke U, YOU, and then delay. And then it repeats again. Make a text box, type a word, delay. Make a text box, type a word, delay. Make a text box, type a word, delay. So I let the computer do all this for me, and I will show you what that looks like. Took a little video of it. So the words are a bit overlapped, but not a big deal. The video, you can kind of see how much work it would be to type this all in manually, so the computer did all that for me. And then I can reuse the script for my next presentation and my next one. Okay, so here we are at the beginning of trying to analyze the sentence, and I have all these words and they're overlapped. So first step I did, I dragged them apart. Now you can mostly see what the words are, they don't overlap very much. Still a total mess. So next thing, I try to group them into categories by parts of speech. So this is a rough draft. I looked at each word and tried to figure out what part of speech it was really quickly. A few of them are wrong, not a big deal. But most of them are correct. And the few errors will get fixed later. I left errors in. I didn't want to go and edit them out and fix everything nicely because I wanted you to see the process better and how you can fix errors later on. So you don't have to get everything perfect at the beginning. You can just keep going through the steps and you'll fix some things later. So what do you do with all this? So many words. What's next? What I decided to do is focus on the most important words and get most of the clutter out of the way. So what's really important are the conjunctions and the verbs. I also kept the word then because we have an if-then sentence. So I thought the then would be important. It would make it clearer and easier to read. So there are 6 conjunctions and 7 verbs, it looks like, and a then. And what are we going to do with them? That's not too obvious. So what I did is I started going through the sentence in order and finding all the words. Just my highlighted words. So like we have the if first, and then we have and, we have are, and, define, and you can keep going through. So I came up with this. The words are now in order if you read the first line, then the second line, then the third line. And this started helping me figure out which verbs go with which conjunctions, and which verbs go together. And also, I noticed there's an implied second if. So it's like if one thing, and also if the second thing, and then it's going to be then these other things. It's if, and then like all of this to, here's the and then it keeps going, and then you get here, and then we have then, and then we have all of this, and all of this. So the then goes to here. It's like if, group, then, group, and then the parenthetical. That's the basic structure of the sentence. So if this and group with these 2 verbs in it, then this and group here with verbs, and then parentheses. So now we have the basic idea of the structure. One thing I noticed when I was going through is that 2 of the ands joined nouns together. So instead of being a clause conjunction, they're just a phrase conjunction. So I marked those with blue dots, and they're not as important. I don't really need to worry about them right now, because they're playing a noun role in the sentence. They're not part of the basic overall structure. Also, I noticed that could affect is a compound verb. So I could split them up and have affect be the object of could, but I'm just going to treat could affect as a single word. It is simpler and good enough. So once we remove these ands, we've got 5 different clauses. And it is not obvious how to put them together into a tree. So I decided to start by making a sentence node and putting them all under that, which was easy. Hadn't done that before. It was just a technique I just made up. So sentence node, and then 5 different things under it. And that got me started on figuring out how they go together. And then I was like, okay, well, the two if parts can go together, and the two main parts can go together. So let's see how that looks. And now we have more of a tree structure. Instead of just a sentence with 5 things in it, we have a sentence with 3 things in it because we've done some amount of nesting. And you can see the main structure of the sentence. It's saying, if these 2 things, then these 2 things. And then also we've got the which at the end, doing something or other. So next I decided that if is a subordinating conjunction, and I will do what I usually do with those. Even though it is compound clauses for the main and subordinate clauses, I can still do my normal treatment. So I have if at the top of the tree, and then we have the main clause first, and the subordinate clause second, and in each case it is a and with a compound clause, but same basic idea. You'll note that this is different than the standard English order, where we usually write if x then y. But I have the then part first on the left. Why is that? Because that's how I do all the subordinating conjunctions. In a tree, I put the main clause first and the subordinate clause second. So for the tree, it is this stuff, if, and then the second stuff. So it is a little unintuitive because it doesn't match how we usually write if statements, but it matches how we write most subordinate clauses. We usually have main clause, subordinating conjunction, then subordinate clause. So I keep the pattern consistent instead of doing a special exception for if. And then there's this which clause, which I figured was modifying basically the whole sentence. It was telling us more information about everything said before, so I attached it to the if. So now it is time to bring back in more of the words. We can work with some additional words. Also, I could have put an orange dot by the which to mark it. You can do that kind of thing if you find it helpful. So now I've got the nouns back. I also brought back the 2 ands that group nouns together, and I brought in the prepositions, which there are only a few of. So I started looking through these, trying to figure out what to do with them, and I found a few issues. The futures are actually adjectives in this sentence, not nouns. And the thinks are verbs. So let's fix that. Also, while I was reading the sentence, I found there was an implied that near the beginning. It's if you think that your future self, etc. So that there was an implied that, which is a conjunction, pretty important, going to need to get that back into the sentence. So I started trying to organize the nouns, putting them with their verbs, trying to find the subjects and the objects for each verb. So I went through and we have a could effect, so you can find it in the sentence. We have could effect, so what is the subject of this could effect? It is decision, so we have decision right here. And then we have an object. What is the object? It could affect a, future, self. A and future are modifiers, though. The noun here is self. So we have an object self. Then you can keep going. So we have another could affect. This is actually in the wrong place, which I noticed later, so we'll fix it later. Let's look at one of the other ones. So this are, and according to my tree, the subject is this and group of self and self, and the object is people. So we have are, people. That looks like we have the object, right? And then what is the subject of this are? We have your future self and your current self. So the subject is and self. So that's right. And then we have the define. What is the subject of this define? Who's doing the defining? You are. And then what is the object of the define? It is self. Current is a modifier. So we have define, you, self. So I went through and tried to place all of the nouns, including for the prepositions. One of the good things about this is you should have exactly the right number of nouns. There should be no leftover nouns. You have to figure out where every noun in the sentence goes. And the main places that they can go are subject, object or complement, or prepositional object. In other words, verbs take one or two nouns, and prepositions take one noun. Also, non-finite verbs can take a noun or two. So if you pair up the nouns with their verb or preposition, that will usually use up all of the nouns in the sentence. Nouns can't just randomly go into sentences. They have to have some grammatical reason they're there, some kind of structure, a parent node. So what I wanted to do next was fix the verbs. I've got these two thinks that I have to deal with somehow. I've got the one here and the one here. So I need a bit more space. I shrunk things. So I started with the you think that. I've dealt with this kind of construction a lot of times before. So I did the normal thing. It's at the very beginning of the sentence. It needs to go at the top and have that as the root node of the entire thing. So I just take the group, all the stuff I have, and I make that one of the childs of that. So all this is going to have to be a child of the word that. And I duplicated the that because it has two roles. It has its conjunction role, where it acts similar to the word and it has its pronoun role, where it points to something, or pro-sentence perhaps. So it points to the rest of the sentence. The that refers to, see, it's if you think that, and then the that refers to everything else, the whole rest of the sentence, the whole idea. Okay, then for the I think, what do we do with that? It is right here. So it's which I think was. So this is a bit confusing. I was like, is it an I think that? That doesn't seem right. Is think was a compound verb? That didn't seem right either. So what I came up with is that I think is an interjection. It is extra words that you could just leave out of the sentence completely, and the sentence would still work. Like, which was the point is completely fine. We don't need the I think. So I read it as an optional interjection. So I think it should have commas around it. I think there's a writing error. In general, this would be a fairly minor writing error, not a big deal. However, the more complicated your sentence is, the more writing errors matter. When it's already a hard sentence, then errors make it more confusing, more difficult. So if you're going to write long, convoluted sentences, you better not make errors. It's not fair to ask people to figure out a difficult sentence that also has errors in it. So in addition to understanding the grammar, they have to understand what errors you made. So anyways, I decided it has commas, and it is an interjection. So the purpose of I think is to give us some extra information. So I put it like this. I gave it a yellow dot for other, because it's an interjection, and also an orange dot for modifier, because it is telling us about which. The extra information is that we think that thing, the thing that the which is. So next, I have most of these nouns lined up, and I put stuff back together. I also, at this point, duplicated the which. So which has two jobs. It is a conjunction, which is the top one. It is also a pronoun or prosentence. It has a noun role as the subject of was, which represents a thing that was something, and also it is joining the clause to the rest of the sentence. So two roles, so I give it two nodes, which is not the only way to do it, but I find it fairly clear. So also at this point, I put on the two gray arrows to show what the two references refer to, both of which refer to the sentence in general. So this node plus all its descendants, the entire tree over here, under the if. I also put in a couple markers. So decision is a subject, and this and group is an object, and the self is an object. The reason I marked subject and object is because normally I put subject on the left, then as the first child, and object as the second child. However, they got split up in this case because the and group has a single shared subject, but it has different objects for the two verbs. So the subject and object got put in different places, so I put labels on them. So next up, I linked in the prepositions. And we still have all those modifiers left. So I started dragging them around. I adjusted a few words as well to make things fit better. It's not perfect, but it's good enough for now. Then dragged more modifiers around. And when I was trying to put in the modifiers, it's when I noticed that I had a problem. So I fixed how the nouns are right around here, where I had that error. The reason I made this error is that could affect is the same verb both times. So I was trying to read, I was like, oh, this goes with could affect, but then I put it on the wrong could affect because it's the same one twice. So I had to read more carefully, and now I've got them in the right places. So the first could affect had self and others as the object, and the second could affect only had self. We can go check that in the sentence. Okay, here's the first could affect, and the object is self and others. And then we have and then we have second could affect, and the object is self. So I've got it correct now. And in both cases, the subject is decision. Okay, so now I link up all the modifiers. And then I just rearranged the words to make it a bit more readable and not have lines overlapping words. And there we go. We've got a tree for the sentence. And this can help us read the sentence and understand what it actually says, which we've already figured out a fair amount along the way, but not actually fully. Like, I never went through and read the whole sentence with you and figured out what it says, because I wanted to focus on grammar rather than using intuition to figure out what the sentence means. So you can do this grammar analysis without really paying attention to what the sentence says. And in fact, when I was doing this, I made the whole tree without thinking about what does this sentence mean, just focusing on the grammar. Grammar and content are partially separate, and that's kind of powerful, because if the content is hard, that generally doesn't really make the grammar harder. Grammar is just grammar, it's kind of always the same. So you can work on that as a way to get started and deal with things. And if you want to understand any detail of the sentence, then you can look at the tree, and you can see what modifies what, and how everything is related and connects together. So although the tree looks really complicated, we got there with fairly simple steps. If you go through and you look at each slide carefully and compare it to the next slide and think about what I was saying, and you have some grammar knowledge, not expert level, just the basics, you'll have a decent chance to understand what I did for that one step. And so I think the steps are reasonably replicatable, something that someone else could do. All right, and then what is the sentence actually talking about? So if something, I'll skip that for now, then main idea. Any decision could only ever affect a future self. So decisions only affect future selves, not present selves, not current selves. And possibly others, so I guess, and possibly other people, other people's selves. So a decision could never affect your current self. Okay, so we get his point. Your decisions can affect your future self and other people, but not your current self. So this and here should probably be the word but. And this is a second error, like those missing commas. And this happens when people write sentences that are more complicated than their intuitions can deal with. This is a sign that the author was getting a little bit confused and lost while writing. Because I think if it was a simple sentence, and short and easy, then he would use the word but correctly instead of and. Probably. Not necessarily, but, decent odds. Using never instead of not is also slightly strange or unusual. But I think it's because he wanted to compare it with ever, so he has ever, never. So ever, never has a kind of parallelism that ever and not doesn't have. So I think that's why he did that. But if you're going to do that, then if you're going to italicize the ever, you should probably italicize the never as well. Okay, so I've been looking at the main part from here to here. The parenthetical is easy, so I'll go through that quickly. It's saying which I think was the point of Ingroux's question. So he's saying all the stuff he's saying is the point that a different forum poster was making when they asked a question. That is easy to understand. It's fairly separate. Like, it could be its own sentence. It probably should be. It could be, period, I think that was the point of Ingroux's question, period. Separate sentence. We did not need to make this sentence longer. So it's pretty easy to understand because you can separate it in your mind and treat it as a separate sentence, even if the author didn't make it a separate sentence. Okay, so main idea is decision affects future, not current self. And then it says if. So we have this if you think, and then, oh, I see, I kind of moved the if. The if is really it's if you think, but I treat it as kind of you think that if, which I think worked out okay and made sense and made it a little simpler, but it's a little different than what was actually written. I moved the if here and used it with the later stuff, and I just treated the you think that as its own group. So I actually got this a little bit wrong, which is again a sign that writing sentences this convoluted is a bad idea. So what we have here is that if future self, current self are different, and define current self as you in the current moment, then. Okay, so I think conceptually the way I read it and treat it makes reasonable sense. Because the point is that if your future and current self are different people, and if current self is only talking about the current moment, then a decision you make only affects your future self, not your current self, because it takes time for the action to happen, the decision to be made, consequences to come to you, etc. So the actual content of the sentence is pretty simple. It's basically just saying your future self and your current self are different people. A decision you make now affects you in the future, not you in this instantaneous moment, this instant. And also, that was Ingroux's point. I think this is reasonably typical of trying to talk to people on forums. This sentence is harder than average, but it's not especially unusually hard. And also, normally you have to read like 3 paragraphs or something, not just one sentence. So even if the sentences are easier, understanding an entire paragraph or several paragraphs together is harder than understanding this one sentence. So, what are some lessons we can take away from this? First, automate repetitive computer tasks. That is a good thing to be on the lookout for opportunities to do. Second, we can go through sentences in small steps. And the steps can be used repetitively on many different sentences, like grouping the words by part of speech as a step that you can reuse no matter what sentence you're analyzing. And then when I took only the verbs and conjunctions, plus one extra word I thought might be important, that is a step you could do repeatedly with other sentences. And it's not that hard of a step. And then what I did with those words was I put them in the same order as in the original sentence. And that was, again, a small step, wasn't too hard. And so on and so forth through the video. Next thing is the grammar analysis is fairly separate from understanding the meaning or the content. So you can use it to help you understand the meaning or content, but you can do the grammar analysis even if you don't understand the meaning or content. If you're good enough at grammar, you could take a science book with a bunch of stuff in it that you don't know what they're talking about, that's too advanced for you, and you could still grammatically analyze the sentences, mostly. You'd probably have to look up a few words in dictionaries. It'd be a little bit harder, but mostly you could still do it, because grammar works the same whether you're writing science or anything else. Another thing I really want to emphasize, because I think it's unintuitive, is when you read a sentence yourself, you can figure out what it says way faster. You're using your intuition instead of making a tree and working it out step by step. When you do that, your intuition is doing all the work of making the grammar tree, and more. Your intuition does so much work under the surface that you don't see. So being able to do it consciously and explicitly actually shows you a lot of the work that your intuition has to do. If you think about, oh, my intuition is doing all that stuff somehow, then it'll be clear to you that your intuition might make mistakes, that it's dealing with a lot of complexity. If you recognize that in reading a sentence there's so much work involved, it will encourage you to write simpler sentences and to have less confidence when you think you know what a sentence says, but it's a kind of hard one. So explicit analysis helps enable discussion with other people. Because if your intuitions agree about what a sentence says, you're fine. But if your intuitions disagree, then how are you going to talk about it unless you can do things like make grammar trees? And how do you even find out if your intuitions agree or disagree about what a sentence says unless you can write down how you're interpreting the sentence? In other words, make a grammar tree. A lot of times, people intuitively read a sentence and they think they're on the same page, but they're not, because they never explicitly say what they think it means, so they never compare what Tom thinks it means with what Sue thinks it means. Doing explicit analysis also helps with error correction. If your intuition makes an error, it's hard to fix that only using intuition, whereas if you can write out a tree, you can carefully look through it and study it and try to fix mistakes in it. And it also helps with the examined life. So there's a famous quote attributed to Socrates that the unexamined life is not worth living. And that is actually one of the main ideas in the field of philosophy, is that we should examine our life and our ideas and think about them consciously, intentionally, explicitly, and try to have good ideas and good actions in our lives, good decisions, etc. Think things through instead of just living your life unconsciously, subconsciously, by intuition, without examining things, without questioning, without challenging things, just taking what's given. So grammar trees are one way to examine your life more, to examine things instead of just assuming you know all the answers and following your intuitions, following what feels natural or normal to you. If you liked this, you can go to my website, Critical Fallibilism, and read some articles and sign up for emails.